terms of the influence he had on the people there, like you, following in his footsteps.
Yeah, Walter Cronkite was the reason, Campbell, that I wanted to get into the news business. And what Sam says is true. You know, when he was forced to retire at the age of 65, I think he still felt that he had a lot of strength left in him and a lot of years left in him. And I remember that he had said publicly over the years that he was kind of forced out of the business just before the real money came in, and he would have liked to have had the opportunity to stay on for a few more years. And I really agree with Sam that he probably could have done it for another 10 years. I mean, he was in his prime when he gave up that seat, and for whatever reason, right or wrong, he did accept it. And he accepted it with grace, though. I think there is plenty of evidence that in the years that followed that he probably regretted the decision. But just in terms of when you look at the panorama of America and you look at the history of news in America, you had Douglas Edwards at CBS. You had Edward R. Murrow, who, of course, is somebody who created a unique niche in American news. But I just don't think that there will ever be anyone like Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite was not only a pioneer in terms of creating this format of the evening news, but he was a man whose credibility and whose generosity and whose trust in America I don't think will ever be repeated. I don't think that there will ever be another Walter Cronkite, and that's probably a good thing, because he came in at a time when America was going through a transitional phase, and he really became sort of the figurehead for so many different things in America, and I think that he will always be remembered for that. And I know for this person who started watching him from the age of 5 years old, he will forever remain an icon of journalism and sort of the pinnacle of American television journalism. I don't think that anybody could ever take on the mantle that he had.
All right, John Roberts, stay with us, and Sam Donaldson, if you guys can. Wolf Blitzer actually interviewed Walter Cronkite. This was on the beaches of Normandy. We want to take a look.
We do have a very special guest, someone who is probably best known in the United States, someone who is associated with D-Day, the entire World War II effort, and I'm talking, of course, about veteran newsman Walter Cronkite. Mr. Cronkite, thank you very much for spending a few moments with us here on CNN.
Good to be with you, Wolf.
You are going to be the master of ceremonies at this memorial service, 50th anniversary service at the cemetery here today.
Very small part, but that's what they call it.
What's your message? What do you hope will be achieved by all of these events?
Well, I think that by reviewing again, looking again at the sacrifice of young men and women today that is taken in the name of warfare, we ought to be sobered into a realization that conflict resolution is far more important than picking up arms to settle our disagreements. It's a terrible thing to think of the thousands upon thousands of young people who will never have a chance to live their lives, who will never see their own children. As Dwight Eisenhower told me, sitting on this very wall over here on the 20th anniversary of D-Day, that he thinks of the grandchildren that these young kids will never have. And that's something for all of us to think about. It's no way to settle our disagreements.
Is it your sense that this younger generation born after World War II knows what happened, or is beginning to think of it as some long forgotten past?
Well, it is a long forgotten thing for them. When I think back when I was 20 years old, or thinking back 50 years, for heaven's sakes, have been beyond the Spanish-American War, and I didn't think much of the Spanish-American War. Of course, it was a vastly different war than this one, which was a fully justified conflict in defense of liberty and attempt to win it back for peoples who'd been trammeled under the boot of that despicable Hitler. So there wasn't any disagreement about this war on the part of the American people. Very few dissenters. It was a war for a very just cause.
What goes through your minds 50 years ago today? Where were you right now?
Right now, I was back in London, but an H hour, at the moment that these guys hit the beach for the first time, at 6:30 a.m., I was about 12,000 feet overhead in a B-17 Flying Fortress.
Did you know what was going on?
Oh, yes. We knew it was D-Day by that time. I didn't know a few hours before that when an Air Force officer came by my apartment and said, "We've got a very dangerous assignment. I can't tell you anything more about it than that, but if you want to come, here we go." And after we got into the car, he said, "This is D-Day." And the Air Force has a very late mission. The Army's asked for some close support behind the beaches from heavy bombers. We weren't trained to do that kind of mission, but a squadron from the 303rd Group, led by a then Major Lewis Lyle, came over, and I was aboard.
You had friends, acquaintances who were killed on D-Day?
Oh, quite a few, including some correspondents. Not on D-Day, but within a few days of the landing.
And so have you been thinking about them over these past few days?
Oh, you can't help but to remember those who died and went through that, suffered the ultimate sacrifice in these things. Correspondents were about tooting my own horn at all. I had my motto was, "Let's get the devil out of here." but the guys who went in on D-Day here were a brave bunch. They knew what they were getting into. They attacking Hitler's fortress Europa, and they knew it was going to be tough on the beaches, but they came to do their job of informing the American people, and I think we should all honor them.
Now, you recently wrote an article.
Walter Cronkite there being interviewed by Wolf Blitzer. Walter Cronkite dying today. He was, of course, he took over as anchor of the CBS Evening News in 1962 until he retired and was replaced by Dan Rather. And we actually have one of his executive producers, a former executive producer, Susan Zirinsky, on the phone with us now. I believe. Susan, you there?
Yes, I am, Campbell.
Tell us what it was like to work for the man.
Well, in the day when we were all kids, and those of us who were starting under Walter embodied kind of the best of everything and the best you would aspire to. There were 3 networks at that point, and Walter was the most important man. You lived and died by what he said, how he wanted pieces to be told. You were answerable to Walter. When Walter picked up the phone, you were scared to death. But on the other hand, there was a core value in what we did. And, it was a time when one voice mattered. The world we live in now, the proliferation of news, which is great for the consumer, but it was a different time. One single man mattered above all else. And that's the dynamic of Walter. And he had this remarkable career. He himself loved every story he went on. Science, space, Russian stories. It was just inspiring to grow up under his watch, because this was the man who was inventing it. So, you felt like at the ground level. And while in today's world, it's fantastic to have this many resources, life was a bit simpler, and there were no questions about core values. Do you pay for footage? Do you pay for interviews? It was a different time and place, and those of us who were fortunate enough to work under him have that core body embodiment of him in our hearts and our brains.
What was he like as a person? Because you talk about, Susan, his enormous influence, and you would think, okay, somebody this incredible has to have an enormous ego, but what was he like as a mentor to someone like you? I mean, now you're the executive producer of 48 Hours. You were just coming up the ranks. How influential was he on you personally?
Well, I have the script that he wrote the night Nixon resigned from office, and he actually threw it away in the garbage can, and I picked it out, and I thought, oh my, this is history. I've got to keep this. I've got to hold on to this. He was about telling the story. It's about the story. It wasn't about him. It was about what we were covering. And I think that he was not afraid to take on the administration. I mean, everybody remembers when he went to Vietnam and he came back, and Lyndon Johnson turned to his people and he said, if we've lost Walter Cronkite, we've lost the war. And he embodied every person. He really approached news. He wasn't a trained broadcaster. He had been a print reporter, but he wasn't trained in broadcasting. But he knew the power of the written word, and he really transferred it to the visual medium. He saw the impact when he went to Vietnam. He saw the impact on space. I think part of the joy of working with Walter, and for those of us that are still around, is that every single day was kind of an adventure. Every day he wanted to break something, to show something. And if somebody else broke something, it was like power to the people. He picked up the phone. It was a very exciting time. And, you know, quite frankly, the basis of what you do, what people in cable and in network television do, we all came out of the Walter Cronkite School, whether you know it or not. The power of that single person, of that single heart of news value is what we all grow up with. You know, some people may get diverted on the course, but when it comes to the end of the day, Walter's voice is kind of rings loud and clear here at CBS even today.
And Susan, there was also this incredible love story between he and his wife. Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, there was a very late birthday party, and George Clooney was there for him, and it was a big audience, and they asked him, of all the people you've met, who is the most important person in your life that you have met? And he said, I'd have to say my wife, Betsy. You know, that's pretty blowaway for a guy that brought Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin together for the Mideast peace talks. There was this was what Walter was. He had this dynamic life. He met every world leader, but the core of Betsy and the family and the kids, he knew. He took time with them. You know, he went away for his vacations. He took those vacations, and it really made him a more interesting and grounded person. He was not blinded by the lights. He really saw the value in family, and Betsy was his rock.
And Susan, you know, you talked about when he did speak out about an issue, the power it had, that you know, how much it conveyed, because he so rarely did. And even after he left the air, he did speak out against the war in Iraq, though. He said it had reminded him of Vietnam. Was that ever a struggle for him as an anchor? You know, the objectivity, and it's far different today, as you know, in cable news, full of opinion. But he completely set a different standard.
You know, I think he understood the power and the growing power of the medium. You know, Edward R. Murrow talked about lights in a box and wires in a box and the power of it. Walter was the next generation, and, you know, the increasing power during Watergate. You know, Walter would come down to Washington to do all these specials that were breaking on a daily basis. The press during that era in the 70s and until Nixon resigned, you know, the power of the press was pretty remarkable. Vietnam was pretty remarkable. You know, you were holding people accountable, and for Walter, that was the penultimate. That was the deepest value of what a journalist could do. It could shed light. He wasn't there with an agenda. He was there with an honest take of what he saw the situation and thought it was his duty to bring it to the American people. That is the value of a Walter Cronkite. And, you know, after he left being the anchor, he did feel that he had influence. He really did understand the value of the power of a journalist and the observation. You know, we're observers. That's what we're trained to do. We're supposed to shed light. There's just a lot more flashlights out there now, and sometimes, just sometimes, it's harder to have a unique voice. The cacophony of the world that you and I inhabit to this day is so loud that to have that dramatic impact is harder today. It's the nature of the beast.
Susan, it was this week that he announced a man has made it to the moon. Let's listen to that.
Roger, tranquility. We copy on the ground.
Oh, boy. What?
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
When that vehicle landed on the moon, I was speechless. I really couldn't say a thing.
You know, Susan, and John Roberts is still with us as well. I want to get both of your reaction to that, because you just look at his face, the joy and excitement of witnessing that moment. And of course, the space shuttle takes off all the time now. We take it for granted, and that was such an extraordinary thing. He was very passionate about covering those events, wasn't he?
There was that scene, you know, when they landed, and he was kind of speechless, and he was wringing his hands, and, you know, it was joy. But, you know, Walter saw the space program as something else also. Walter saw the space program as the embodiment of a country that needed something to hold on to. And so it became not just about the space program, but it was about the power of the American spirit. And he saw it, and he got it, and he felt it, but then he brought it forth and just shared it. You know how when somebody walks in, they're so excited. Well, when Walter Cronkite went on the air on space, you couldn't help but feel that joy.